All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Gallaudet University's Ph.D. in Educational Neuroscience Distinguished Lecturer Series. We would like to take the time to thank you all for coming out here tonight, including Gallaudet University students and staff, and those from other institutions, including those from the University of Maryland and from Georgetown University. We extend a warm welcome to all of you here in the room, and to those of you who are watching from home. This is a new program here at Gallaudet University, and I'm Bradley White.
I'm Taylor, and I'm also an undergraduate student here at Gallaudet University, and we're thrilled to have our two distinguished guest speakers today, Dr. Kathryn Hirsh-Pasek and Dr. Roberta Golinkoff. Those are our distinguished lecturers for this afternoon. This is an annual event that we host, and this is our third series for Educational Neuroscience. The topic will be Educational Neuroscience, Leaders in the Changing Studies in Scientific Learning for Young Children.
A warm welcome specifically to Dr. Kathryn Hirsh-Pasek. She is the Stanley and Deborah Lefkowitz Faculty Fellow in the Department of Psychology at Temple University. She also serves as the director of the Infant Language Laboratory. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the American Psychological Association's Bronfenbrenner Award, Award for Distinguished Service to Psychological Science, and the Distinguished Lecturer Award, as well as from the Association for Psychological Science, the James McKean Cattell Fellow Award. She has made major contributions to pioneering science and educational neuroscience, including her discoveries about early language development and the infant language perception and cognition. Dr. Hirsh-Pasek has strong interests in bridging the gap between basic science research and its application for the benefit of society. These interests have prompted her to serve as an investigator on the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development's study of early child care, as well as on the advisory boards of the Fred Rogers Center, Jumpstart, and Disney Junior. She has published 12 books and more than 200 other publications.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Roberta Golinkoff. Dr. Golinkoff is a member of the Psychology, Linguistic, and Education Department at the University of Delaware. She holds the Unidel H. Rodney Sharp Chair of that university. She founded the Child's Play, Learning, and Development Lab there, and is the recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, as well as the 2015 recipient of the James McKean Cattell Award from the Association for Psychological Science. Helping to advance the science of learning and language acquisition, Dr. Golinkoff helped design and pioneer research focused on children and how they can best learn and grow. From designing research to evaluating the educational impact of different apps, working with the community to promote guided play, and also in learning for children and getting into the community in order to increase language skills through exposure in everyday settings. I am sure that her unique experience and impact in the field of child development will leave its mark tonight with us as we seek to apply her research to our studies of language and development within the Penn community at Gallaudet.
Tonight, we will hear from them on a program entitled Living in Pasteur's Quadrant, Navigating the Uncharted Waters Between Basic and Applied Research. We are thrilled to have the opportunity to host this presentation tonight, as it exemplifies the academic integrity and the rigor of the sciences here at Gallaudet University, the Ph.D. in Educational Neuroscience program, and the field in general. Please help me welcome Drs. Kathryn Hirsh-Pasek and Roberta Golinkoff as our lecturers this evening.
Hi, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here. I want to thank you, Laura. It's just amazing. It was amazing to get the invitation. We are so happy to be at Gallaudet. Melissa, can't thank you enough for all that you helped pull together in all the many arrangements before we got here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I spent a lot of time here. I like you guys.
So we're going to talk to you about something that probably seems a little out in left field, because normally we talk about language research, right, Roberta, or play research, or literacy research. And today we want to talk about a particular passion that we have, which is about taking the research from the lab to the living room. And that is, how do we take what we know about in the science of learning and actually put it in the hands of people who can use it?
So our first foray in this direction was a book called How Babies Talk, which came out in 1999. It's ready for a revision. And we were actually concerned at the time about how our colleagues would take it, that we were writing for a trade press.
Yeah, do you remember
right?
we hid in the
for a
national
fancy
conference?
Journal. So we were quite relieved to learn that people thought this was a great idea, and we would have done it anyway. We did.
That's right.
But we feel like because we get grant dollars from your money, and because we know stuff that can make a difference for kids' lives, we got to get it out there. So Kathy and I have been working together for so long that we got confused as to our names.
You just thought it was a typo. But let's give it a whirl, right, Roberta?
Go for it.
All right, so I think everybody's talking about it. Seems to me whenever you pick up the newspaper today, people are talking about childcare or high-quality preschool. Many people have now heard about the 30 million word gap. There's the grade-level reading campaign, and they haven't quite made up their mind whether it should be STEM or STEAM or STEM or STEAM, with the A, of course, adding the arts in the middle.
But some of us are pretty wary about what's being said out there.
And we thought we would give you a couple of examples. One of our favorite examples comes from Eric Jensen. Now, you have to look this up, because when you Google Eric Jensen's name, you get, here we go, Vanna, 412,000 hits in just 0.38 seconds.
It's probably more by now.
Yeah, and we know that you have an absolutely fabulous brain research going on at Gallaudet. What you might not know, however, is that we know enough right now, today, to take everything we know about the brain to translate it immediately so that it can be used in a classroom with specificity, because Eric Jensen tells us that it is so.
Who's Eric Jensen? I don't know.
Well, go ahead, Roberta. You got to give them our favorite product.
There
Here
are
it
also
is.
products out there in the world. We particularly like this one.
Oh, yes.
Because you wouldn't want your child to be unbalanced. So if you buy the right brain CD, you must also buy the left brain CD so you can throw out your money twice.
And at a recent White House conference, we actually met to talk about what's going on out there. And the first question that was asked of the group of 35 or 40 of us who were assembled was, can any of us think of one study, just one study, that was so completely definitive that it was ready to put into the school system today? And people thought, and they thought, and they thought. And nobody came up with anything.
Not
So
one.
question 2 was, if this group of people who actually do this research can't think of even one study, then why does everybody think that we have all this information?
So there are also educational, you have to use the fingers to show quotes, apps proliferating at an alarming rate. And during the time that we've been setting up here, there are probably 100 more educational apps that have hit the marketplace. And these apps will help you learn anything you could imagine. You name the topic, it's out there. So one of the things that we did recently was a piece for Psychological Science in the Public Interest that talked about what it would take to make a great app. And those are principles of learning that we pulled from the learning science literature.
And we actually called this putting education back in educational apps. And this is, isn't it, Roberta? This is our favorite.
Oh, this is
This
pathetic.
is it. This is the Your
I want to
Baby.
go like this.
Yes, it's the Your Baby Can Read series.
No, she can't.
No, she really can't. And Susan Newman actually took it to task, a brilliant researcher who actually said, we got to find out what's going on here. She looked at 117 babies from 10 to 18 months, and she found quite definitively, can your baby read, G?
No, she can't. And the study actually appears in the Journal of Educational Psychology. I was lucky enough to review it. So at the 2000 International Conference on Infant Studies, in fact, this is some of the motivation that Kathy and I feel for bringing out the science to the world. Andy Meltzoff said something like, we're paraphrasing, why is our infancy research so misinterpreted by the public? Why do they translate our findings on number to mean babies can do math? Our findings on language to mean babies can read? So we feel a personal responsibility to try to set this straight. And this is part of what motivates the research that we do.
And we think that partly the reason for this misinterpretation is that the back of toy boxes are really one of the ways in which parents learn the most about developmental psychology and child psychology.
Because we're not out there.
We're not out there, but the product lines are everywhere to be found.
So our careers have focused on conducting what we call use-inspired basic research in the science of learning and developing platforms for scientific outreach within the science of learning. And of course, we invite you all to join us because the American public is being led by the nose by the marketplace, not
True enough.
by the science.
So the talk we're going to give you today is in 2 parts. Part 1 is Exploring Life in Pasture's Quadrant, 3 examples in language and literacy. And a second part on, get ready to leap here, leaping beyond the quadrant into the real world at large and how we think we can take the science of learning that we gather in the laboratory and actually really use it in our classrooms, in our communities, and in our homes.
So this is the name of the book from which our talk comes. And in 1997, political scientist Don Stokes wrote this book, offering a new solution to the tension that has always existed between basic research and applied research, and this is what we borrow from today.
What he did in his vision is he suggested a 2x2. And in this 2x2 grid, he looked both at the quest for fundamental understanding and consideration of use.
I play Vanna.
Doesn't she do a great job at it? All right, so when you have high quest for fundamental understanding and pretty low consideration of use, you get somebody like Bohr's quadrant, who did pure basic research and actually wrote that he really didn't care much about how it was applied. On the upper right-hand quadrant, you see Pasture's quadrant, which he called use-inspired basic research. And it turned out that Pasteur actually got many of his research questions by looking into the world and then bringing it back to the lab to do his research. And of course, once he was in the lab and discovered something, taking it back out to the world again. Down in the lower right, what we see is high consideration of use and rather low quest for fundamental understanding. Believe it or not,
this light.
that would be Mr. Edison. So you might wonder what would go in the low, low category. And I'm happy to tell you that David Clark from Carnegie Mellon University has figured out what we should put in there. Faculty meetings.
Now, you know, there could be another take on past year's quadrant, and we think iconography matters. Those are all old white dead guys. So here we have women who've made wonderful contributions. Marie Curie gave her life for the discovery of radium. Over here we have Virginia Apgar, who came up with the scale by which we evaluate newborns. This gorgeous woman is Hedy Lamarr, who came up with a way to jam communications during World War II that helped defeat the Nazis.
And in the low, low.
Tinkerbell.
Now, we could also write this from the psychologist's point of view. And if we do that in the high understanding and low consideration of use, you would have Titchener. And I really love this particular quote. The diversion into practical channels of energy, which would otherwise have been expended in the service of the laboratory, must be regarded as a definite loss to pure science. Down here, in the high consideration of use, we have Anastasi, who did wonderful work in figuring out how to do assessments. And we want to zoom in now on the use-inspired basic research, which we have labeled Bronfenbrenner's quadrant. And in that quadrant, today, we'd like to show you what we've done, some work in language and literacy, but also let you know that we've done a lot of work in early spatial development and the importance of spatial experience for math learning as part of the Spatial Intelligence and Learning Center, which is another of the NSF Learning Center, Science of Learning Centers that is in the country today. Let's start with language and literacy.
Okay, so the 30 million word gap is known by many, many people, but just in case, Hart and Risley in 1995 did a study of children from professional, working class, and welfare families, in which they found that the difference between the welfare and the professional class families was a cumulative total of roughly 30 million words by the time the child reached 4. So as you can see on this chart, this is the number of hours heard by children in each of these groups. They start out similarly, but by the age of 4, the differences are enormous. Now, who cares? We care because these vocabulary numbers impact children's success in school and also impact their IQ. And the only reason I care about IQ is it correlates about 0.6 with school achievement.
And here you see what these recorded vocabulary sizes are. And this was, again, work that was done by Hart and Risley. Now, I should also say that this Hart and Risley data, for a lot of people who don't like the Hart and Risley because they say the working class, the welfare was not a good way to figure out where kids sat, well, they've actually redone a lot of this in many different studies, among them by Erica Hoff. And in fact, the data come out quite the same as Hart and Risley had originally suggested. Verbal IQ correlates with school achievement. So if you have higher vocabulary and higher vocabulary leads to higher verbal IQ, then guess what? You're probably going to have higher school achievement. Reading is parasitic on language. Language encodes the concepts that you need in order to learn not just language and literacy, but also social studies and science. Beautiful work by Catherine Snow suggests that we have to increase the diversity of the vocabulary that we have. The depth of understanding, says Susan Newman. The web of words, says Susan Newman. Language is simply the best predictor of later academic and even social success.
So it's not all about the number of words that pass kids' ears, as we've just tried to say. when parents talk to kids in a way that is contingent and responsive to what the child has said, that's when children's language grows. And sometimes that message gets lost in the popular translation, and people think all they have to do is talk at their child. It's not about talking at your kid. It's about talking with your kid and building on what they say.
And we note here just two of the major programs that have been started, one Providence Talks and one Too Small to Fail. And while if you look at the details of what they're doing, they get this too. They understand that it's about the interaction. But the message that's often given to the public at large is talk more, read more, sing more, talk more, and that will be the solution. Of course, if that's the solution, then plopping a kid in front of a television gives them a lot of words. Well, on the heels of a number of our colleagues, and building off of some work that Lauren Adamson and Roger Bakeman had done, we decided that we would look more closely at what it really meant to have this quality kind of interaction. And we decided to revisit the questions about both the quantity of speech and the quality of speech and their impact on later language.
So we asked two questions. One is whether low-income children who are successful language learners experience a higher quality of communication than their less able peers. That's communication with a parent. And the second we wanted to know was, how important is this quantity of language that children hear relative to the quality of the communication foundation that's being set up between parent and child?
Secondary data analysis from the NICHD study of early child care served as our base. As many of you might know, that was a huge longitudinal study where we looked at kids from 0 to 16 years of age. We had varied ethnicity, we had varied socioeconomic status, and I'm happy to say, as someone who was on that team, we had a lot of videotapes. Like you could drown in videotapes. But what it meant is that we could go back and we could revisit what some of the mother-child interactions were, and we could ask how those would predict later language.
So we did a study where we first found 3-year-olds who fell into 3 groups. Notice that all these children were in fact from low-income homes. So there isn't a class effect that we're going to tell you about. Now, we were blind, as were the coders, to which children fell into those language groups, high, middle, and low. And then we went back to 2 years of age. We had videotapes of the moms interacting with these kids in a task called the 3 bags task, where there are different objects that they can pull out and play with. And we coded the 15-minute interactions for 3 variables that were all related to quality. One was symbol-infused joint engagement. That sounds very fancy, but it simply means, did mother and child use gesture and words together? Did they communicate in a way through gesture and words? We also looked at how fluid and connected their exchanges were, and again, that could be verbal or it could be nonverbal, because the mom could imitate something that the kid did or vice versa. We also looked at whether they seemed to have playful routines and rituals. So one of the bags included a book. So if a kid takes out the book and holds it upside down and tosses it away, it suggests that they don't have the routine of reading together. But if the kid pulls out the book and cuddles up and sits down on the mom's lap, that looks like they have that routine. And we also coded for the quantity of mother's words per minute, and our coders were highly reliable.
So I just have to share with you some of the drama. So the drama is we have this idea that if it's really about the quality, and if Lauren and Roger had already figured out how we could actually code this, this could be a gold mine or really very disappointing, right? And we talked to Lauren and Roger, and we talked to Margaret Owen, who did all the sensitivity ratings on the NICHD study, and talk about being nervous. We said, okay, can you in Texas pick these 60 kids?
So that we were blind.
We were blind. She picks the 20, the 20, the 20, and the tapes were sent over to my lab, and nobody knew where they were going to fall. So what we then do is we coded, as Roberta said, coding and coding, really, let me tell you how much we coded. And when we were all done, we then shipped all the data to Atlanta, to Roger and Lauren. We had no idea what was going to happen. We sat nervously on the edge of our chair as the data came out, and we asked whether those interactions, quality and quantity, were actually going to predict whether the kids fell in one of these three groups, and here's the findings. Well, you ready, folks? Here's the unique prediction of the quality of the input on the layers that Roberta had told you about. And it turned out that it uniquely predicted 16% of where they were going to land at age 3 when you looked at the 2-year-old mother-child interactions.
So that's 12 months later. That's a long time.
That's
to account
unbelievable.
For 16%.
But wait, it gets better, right?
It does, yes.
It gets better. So then you might ask, well, what about the overlap? Because there's going to be some overlap. You know, when you have a lot of quality, it probably goes with a lot of quantity. So what's that look like? We can account for another 10%. Now we ask ourselves, well, of course, everybody's talking quantity. It must be that the quantity is really going to account for a lot uniquely. And here's the answer. An additional 1%. So what do we take away from this? The first is that the quantity of input and the quality of input both matter, but the quality of input matters more. Okay? Think about that back and forth, which really accounted for most of the variability. Second key point, it was not about poverty in our study. This was not a study about poverty because everyone was in the low-income group. I should add here, we don't have it here, but we also looked to see whether this was just a matter of sensitivity and responsivity, and it accounted significantly more than what you got if you just looked at sensitivity and responsivity. And this is a powerful language effect.
And this finding also should make people who care about interventions
really
feel
happy.
Very optimistic, because poverty per se does not guarantee that children are going to fall in the lowest tertile. Depending upon the kinds of interactions they have with their parents, they could wind up in the top tertile.
And we should add that based on this data, I'm happy to tell you that we are now collaborating with a group in Philadelphia that has 600 young low-income mothers, and we're using what we've learned right away to put it into an intervention. What counted for the most? It was fluid and connected conversations, which we are calling conversational duets. Why conversational duets? Because you can't sing it alone. The solo doesn't work, but the duet does. And finally, we're suggesting a shift of metaphor. For the most part, we have talked about filling gaps in the way that we talk about our scientific literature. Do this to fill the gap. But maybe it's more about building a foundation that's strong from the get-go rather than filling a gap, a new metaphor for intervention.
So these conversational duets, whether they're happening during play or reading storybooks, the key is contingency. The key is picking up on what the child is interested in and talking about that. So this kind of contingent and meaningful communication is what fuels language growth. And we also secretly think, but we'll go after this too, that this is what fuels children's attention, this kind of back and forth with adults, and prepares them for paying attention in school.
So with that note, can I just take a footnote here, G? So I just spent a couple days working as part of a new post that I took, which is with the Brookings Institute, and everybody's talking soft skills, soft skills, soft skills. And I said, we can't call them soft skills. It's just killing me. You know, this idea of the social interaction is the soft skill, right? And I said, no, actually, what you're calling soft skills are the bedrock for the hard skills. And I think that's one of the lessons that comes out of this. But let us tell you what we did to really try to nail this question of contingency.
But most importantly, this
Yes.
is my grandchild and this is Kathy's.
Yes. Okay. We have to point out the important things in life.
So we wanted to manipulate contingent interaction by looking at learning in video chats. This paper's published.
What we decided to do was to teach a child 2 new words. And we knew that the child could learn, 2-year-olds could learn these 2 new words when they were in live interaction with another human being, in this case, the other human being mom. We also knew, and this is Sarah Roseberry's work, that you couldn't learn those same 2 words if you just watched a televised display. So the question we had was, what would happen in video chat? I mean, in video chat, you have a 2D display, but you really do have contingent responding.
So we also looked at the learning of verbs, and those are hard words. So this is Sarah Roseberry, and she's on a screen saying to a child, wow, I'm licking him, and she's shaking the baby. I'm licking the baby doll, I'm licking the baby doll.
You got to make up new words in this field.
Of
It's what we
course.
do. It's
Keep
what we do.
going.
All right. I'd also add that Sarah Roseberry is now the outreach scientist in Pat Colt's lab.
At Life, yeah.
Life, yeah. All right.
So we trained the words in either live presentations, that was our previous study, or in video chats, as on Skype or TV. We used 24 to 30-month-old children sitting on the mom's lap. So notice the features of this kind of language training. The video chat, the person is responsive and actually contingent on what the child is doing, but it's still 2-dimensional. In the live interaction condition, the person is respondent and contingent, but the person's there in real life. And the yoked video training condition is when we showed baby A a video made by Sarah with baby B. So it was no longer contingent or responsive.
Well, let's see, Roberta. What do you think's going to happen here? Is teaching it with video chat more like live? Or is it going to be more like watching something on TV? Let's just skip to the results.
So how did kids respond to the video chats? You can see here that the video chat condition, the kids looked at the word that we taught them. We showed an action just as much as in the live condition, whereas the yoked video condition, kids were at chance. And this was in the intermodal preferential looking paradigm where they saw 2 videos simultaneously. So video chats work.
Well, gosh, Roberta, if it turns out that it's contingency, then there's this unbelievable natural experiment going on. In fact, they even wrote about this natural experiment yesterday in the New York Times.
Yes, they did.
Did you see it? It turns out Sherry Turkle has a new book. And people were saying maybe we should talk to other humans and stop Googling while we're talking to them. Now, I, for one, have noticed this a lot because I have one wonderful son who at dinner is constantly looking down like that. Now, I'm not supposed to notice that he is, but what I did several weeks ago is I texted him, and I said, hi from mom, other side of table. At any rate, it's a great natural experiment, and we could ask not what happens when you preserve the contingency, but what happens when you break the contingency. Does this kind of an interruption disrupt learning for young children?
So to test this question, we asked mom to teach 2 novel verbs to their kids. They were sitting in the same room with them. So it was a within subject design. They taught these words. So in one condition, the mom received a phone call halfway
For one word, not one
through.
condition. Each mom had one interrupted, one not.
Yes. And then she got to teach word 2 without interruption. And in the other condition, the mom received these orders differently. She taught one complete word, and here she got an interruption phone call. What was the interruption phone call? That, you know, like the experimenter said, so did you have your coffee today? You'll see, we have a little movie.
Now, you might ask yourself, when you're interrupted, do you just stop talking? Or are we just going to show you results because the mom who's interrupted, she can't cope anymore, so she shuts up? Well, it turns out
Nope.
that's not the case.
Nope.
She tries to make up for the fact that she was interrupted, and in fact, well, not significantly, she talks a little more, but you gotta see this. This is real tape. Need we say more? All right, and these are the results. When mom was interrupted, the kid did not learn the word. But when mom was not interrupted, they learned the word just fine, as they had in our other paradigms. So again, it appears that when you have contingency, then the kids learn just fine. When you break that contingency, they don't, and this is the work of Jessa Reed, who just finished her dissertation and is moving to Ohio State University.
To work with Derek Houston on
All right.
understanding how deaf kids learn language. So what have we said so far? We seem to have shown you that contingency really matters, because we did a study showing that conversational duets in vivo really serve as the basis for later better language development, and we also showed you that contingency can work over Skype, even though it's a 2D screen. And we did a third study that turned this idea of contingency on its head by breaking it. And in fact, breaking the contingency disrupted children's language learning.
The message then from Pasteur's quadrant is, if you want to increase children's language and you want to reduce the 30 million word gap, focusing on quantity is not enough. The quality of the adult-child conversation matters, and matters a lot, and the science of learning allowed us to pinpoint what the mechanism would be that defines what we mean by quality.
So we've told you a little bit about the language and literacy stuff that we've done, and we think that getting these answers and publishing in the scientific journals is just not enough. So we don't want to just live inside the quadrants. What we would like to do is leap beyond the quadrant to the world at large, to disseminate the science. Why not tell people what we know about what helps children learn language?
Now, leaping from Pasteur's quadrant, of course, has its risks. And you got to ask yourself, when has the field amassed enough gold standard data to share it with the public? And how in the world can we best share the body of evidence in ways that protect the integrity of the science while also informing practice? Because a lot of what happens is when the stuff gets transferred, you lose the nuance, and you want to keep the nuance. And we want to make sure that we're all still really grounded in the scientific evidence on the science of learning.
Absolutely. So we're often reticent, and we refers not just to me and Kathy, but to other scientists in the room and elsewhere, to share our findings and to put them out in the marketplace of ideas, because we are trained to be super careful, to replicate 10 times. We are our own worst critics. But in fact, we know a lot more than the charlatans out there who are making stuff up and selling parents stuff. So we suggested principles, for example, that could be derived across a number of areas, as in our apps paper and principles for language learning, and we worked on the language and literacy section of the California preschool curriculum. Maybe it's time to derive principles in other areas, areas where you guys are experts.
All right, now this is before we go on, I have to give a shout out to Laura who asked me to mention this. So one of the things that we did in deriving these language principles is that we got a telephone call one day and somebody said to us, would you help us write the curriculum for the California preschool? And I said, oh, no, I'm a basic scientist, but thank you so much for calling. I was really honored. And then they called back, and I talked to Roberta, meanwhile, and she said, well, you know, if we really mean that we want to share the science, we gotta like say yes to this. I was dying, okay? But she was right. We did have to do this, but what we thought is, you know, California is a really interesting state because it's a majority-minority state, so you can't any longer just give examples that are going to work for everybody, right? What you needed to do was to go through the science and to figure out what are the principles that we actually know about that could actually be used to, we're talking about it now as languageize classrooms and languageize homes so that people were using the science in their everyday. But of course, there are thousands and thousands of papers that nobody wants to read, so how do you do this? How do you distill it to keep the science there and still make it what we call edible science, which is accessible, digestible, and usable. And so this afternoon, I'm happy to tell you that not only did Roberta and I do the California preschool curriculum, but I just got back from giving a talk at National Head Start. And when the National Head Start people had first heard some of these principles that we came up with, on one page, 6 principles to help you languageize the environment and create high-quality language environments, they said, would you pop over and do our National Leadership Conference today? And so this afternoon, I actually did, and Head Start has at least made a commitment to move forward and to use some of these principles to languageize classrooms around the country.
So, as Kathy said, we want to share our wares by creating edible science. We want to come down out of the tower and talk in language that people, real people, can understand. So we want to make it accessible, digestible, and usable. And we want to disseminate information, but we've also come up with a new category,
we want to
dissemination of experiences.
And we think that dissemination of experiences is a whole new way to share science. So we'll share a little of that as well.
So, for example,
Bad
anybody
news.
know who he is?
Yeah.
Walter
Ancient.
Cronkite. So he was what we call a trusted gatekeeper, right, for bringing us information. But now with the web, oh my God, you can get how many different takes on the news, and you don't know what to trust anymore. Even publishing a journal article, it's estimated that it's read by 17 people. So,
And that's a high.
that's not going to help us get the word
estimate.
out.
That's a high estimate.
And unfortunately, Cronkite and the other gatekeepers are gone because now the news is everywhere, right?
So in disseminating information, there are some folks in our field who are out there doing it, and I'd have to say Laura Petito is one of them, and you've been amazing, amazing. We really need to do more of it, and we need to train ourselves to do more of it. I mean, today, it's even worse than it was. Without the gatekeepers, anybody can say anything, and you'll believe it.
Kathy, anybody is an expert.
Anyone's an expert.
Anybody.
Right? In fact, some people say your baby can read.
That's right.
No, they can't. Okay, so anyway, we're back to talking about you could do TED Talks. Well, not everyone can, but some people can. Blogs, you can write books. We have to figure out how to cut through the noise. Because with all these outlets there, as Roberta said, anybody can pose as an expert. The back of a toy box becomes an expert way of learning about child development. And we need to do better, and we need to all be ambassadors to train ourselves to do better. I think it's our responsibility to work with journalists, to do some of these blogs, and to get the information out there.
So most of the people I know at the University of Delaware avoid talking to the press like a plague. But if we all do that, we'll never get the science out there. So we have to turn it around and get our colleagues wanting to talk to the press, wanting to give back, given that they're supported to do this research. So we want to also disseminate experiences. We think that people learn by doing. And using the findings from psychological science, we've experimented with a number of ways to foster learning for families and kids. 3 examples.
Example 1 is the supermarket study. Actually, this just came out, we're happy to tell you.
Yes, no longer in press.
Yeah, so for example, we know that having these quality conversations really makes a difference. And we also know from Hart and Risley that a lot, you ready?
We're going to act this out?
We're going to act this out. That a lot of people aren't getting the language experiences that they need. So we thought we would bring you 3 scenes from the Foundation for Child Development's How Do Families Matter in 2009. Mom 1. I'll be the baby. Roberta will be the mom.
Pushing the cart.
Looking at an eggplant. Ready? What's that?
Mom 1 totally ignores the child.
Here we go.
Yes.
Mom 2. What's that? What's that?
Eggplant.
Mom 3. What's
It's an eggplant. Look. Feel how smooth. Feel how smooth it is. You want to take it home? We'll cook it. Yes. So we know these are ladies who lunch. We know that. But still, we wanted to promote parents to have more conversations in the supermarket. Apparently, families go there like at least once a week.
Right?
Why wouldn't we want to encourage talk?
Why don't we go where the people are? So we decided we would go into the supermarket. And at first we had these pretty ditzy signs where it would cost us all of $60 to do this.
Highly technical project.
Highly technical. Talking to your child helps their language grow. We were in North Philadelphia in the fresh grocer.
And in Delaware. And we had these signs up around the produce and also in the dairy department. The shocking news is that this is middle-income supermarkets with the signs down, that is no signs, and the signs up. That part isn't shocking. Makes no difference.
You might want to tell them how we would even know. Here we were hanging in the back with our little white coats,
as if
watching
we
parents as they came into the supermarket.
Right. But on our little clipboards, we're recording the talk. All right. Now, in the low-income families, notice that they start out talking a bunch less, and after the signs go up, they are indistinguishable from the middle-class families. So there really are simple ways to spur conversation between families in places where they naturally go.
A 33% increase in language. The second one was the ultimate block party. Here was the idea, and Susie Ann was actually there, and really, it could not have happened
Susie Ann
without
looked
you.
Fabulous
Made
in
it
her
happen.
white lab coat
We all,
with
yep,
handprints
there we were.
that
There we
said
were.
"Play Doctor" on buttons that she wore.
That we all had, made in our labs with finger
Yes.
paint. Let me tell you, it was something else.
Yes.
But we decided, look, let's take another place where people naturally go, and let's see if we could turn it into a learning environment. If you can have art in Central Park, why the heck can't you also have the science of learning in Central Park? 28 different activities. We called it the ultimate block party. And we should add, there was nothing commercial there. You could
sold
buy
nothing.
zero, all right? This was all just about having experiences in the park that were going to change the lens on the way families saw the power of the science that we do. So here it is.
This should go in the Guinness World Book of Records. It's probably the largest Simon Says anywhere. Now, think about this for a minute. The people on our Distinguished Scientific Advisory Board suggested all these activities coming directly out of the science of learning. There are actually papers on Simon Says, because what kids learn with Simon Says is executive function. They learn to inhibit. We also had blocks by Lego that were all in the same color because they wanted to heighten the spatial awareness that children had. We produced a 75-page playbook that we distributed for free. It was like insane. It was over 50,000 people, and Kathy and I are running around saying, don't throw this away. Take it home. Use it. It has more things you can do with your kids, and it describes what these activities are about. And we gave out over 20,000 of these and ran out. We had over 50,000 people.
It was
nuts.
Swarming. It was unbelievable.
Right?
And of course, we had to study it, right? Because we are scientists. So we did polls of people as they were coming in and as they were leaving, and we asked what people learned, and they filled out surveys. And guess what? After they visited 4 of our 28 exhibits, just 3 or 4 of them, they changed their idea about what learning was. They actually saw the spatial learning at the Lego exhibit and the executive function that was going on in Simon
We hope to have that
Says.
paper in the literature soon.
It will definitely be there.
So over 50,000 people showed up. We had subsequent block parties in Toronto. We love Canada. They get it. They get it. They're into playful learning. That's why we speak there. Baltimore. And there are more planned in Bath, England, and Washington, D.C. by the Council for Humanities.
But notice this was not a one-off.
No.
Once you do something like a block party, it has many, many ripples. Because for one, it got all the agencies, nonprofit, for-profit, the universities, the scientists. It was the first time they ever sat around a table together. It was unbelievable.
Amazing, right?
Unbelievable.
That organizations are working for children and families that didn't know each other, and they came together around the block party. We also had volunteers starting from high school, college, teachers, at all levels who got trained over YouTube and who showed up and got T-shirts and ran the activities. I can't wait to do this again.
I know. And a reach of 10.2 million, that was before the New York Times article that actually featured it. So we got the science out there. And did the learning stick? Well, we'll find out. We think it did because we know in the cities that we've been in, it actually changed attitudes and patterns of interaction. I want to give you our latest example. It's the newest initiative that we just received funding for about 3 weeks ago. Looks like it will be at least in Philadelphia and in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we're also hopeful and have been told that there's a good shot this is going to happen in Boston as well. So get Washington moving, guys.
Right.
It's called Urban Thinkscapes. And do we have extra pictures? Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Let us show you what it is.
Well, we have to tell you that Itai Palti is a brilliant young architect in Tel Aviv, and he's working with us to create transformations in everyday life that spur parents and children to talk to each other. So, for example, here's an ordinary street light. What if a kid could turn a crank and produce different colors or produce pictures of animals? This has got to generate talk between parents and kids.
And over here, what you see is our new designs for bus stops. And what we're taking is we're actually taking areas like spatial learning where we know that young kids in low-income environments don't have the experience with puzzles. We've actually seen this. So why don't we create puzzles on the back of a bus stop? And if we do that on a bench and we have 3 different puzzles, it works on a dowel rod system, so you can actually get 3 different puzzles per bench, then we can actually transform the way you think about the piazza around a bus stop with these lights and with these benches. This is the scale bench, which is another of our models. We're going to be working in low-income environments, as I said, in Tulsa and in Philadelphia to make this a reality. Though most of our science of learning efforts are focused on school reform, it's important, I think, for us to realize that we might need a slight paradigm change. Doesn't mean we should ignore the school, but only 20% of a child's time, of their waking time, is spent in school. So it's time to start thinking about communities as well.
Absolutely. So the field of psychology, as you know, is often divided between basic and applied research. But we want to argue that use-inspired science, as in the science of learning, will help us move forward in both theory and in application to make our world a better place for children and families.
But doing the science is not enough. Our science is often misunderstood. And if it is misunderstood, we believe that sometimes that's our fault. Right. It's because we haven't done enough to make it clear. And sometimes we never really read beyond our own narrow discipline. And we can step back a little bit like you do on Google Maps and get a broader view. So our challenge to all of you is to ask whether we can not only do research in Pasteur's Quadrant, but whether we can also leap beyond it to help families, policymakers, and educators understand what we do.
In fact, the International Congress of Infant Studies is working on a model where we want to offer fellowships that twin researchers with journalists. Let's face it, none of us were trained how to talk to the press. Ed Ziegler has one of his thousands of books. He talks about how we never trained people to talk to the press, and therefore people avoid it. But if we could work alongside a journalist who could help us extract the nuggets of our work and how to talk about it, we could become trained, all of us, in the dissemination of our science.
We hope you're going to join us in this. We understand that we're asking everyone here to engage in a super new model. But we really do think that it's time. And in fact, it's not really all that new an idea. Because it turns out that George Miller in 1969 said in his presidential address, as a science concerned directly with behavioral and social processes, psychology might be expected to provide intellectual leadership in the search for a new and better personal and social arrangement. I can imagine nothing we could do that would be more relevant to human welfare, and nothing that could pose a greater challenge to the next generation of psychologists than to discover how to best give psychology away.
So to help you take that challenge, we are editing a special section in the journal Child Development called Bringing Developmental Science into the World, in which we hope to publish papers that are good examples of how we can bring our science into the world.
We have to tell them what happened. So we put out the call to have these papers in child development. We thought, I hope we'll get enough. You know, really, we're the ones who are doing this, but we know everybody else is super shy about it. Maybe nobody will send us anything. Was it 78?
78 submissions.
78 submissions. We really couldn't believe that we would have to turn that many people away.
True.
Anyway, we hope you'll take the challenge with us. We are even trying to do tweets. I really do have to tell you how we ended up doing tweets, because for all of us this is new, not just for those of you who are asking to join us, but one night I went to sleep at my son's house in New York, And he said to me, the only way you're really going to get this stuff out there is if you really learn to use social media well and couple it with your message. And I said, yeah, I'm going to work on that. Roberta's going to work on it. And the next morning, I woke up, and I swear to God, he had made this Twitter thing for us. And I went, oh, my God, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to tweet. My first tweet took me 2 hours.
Right.
Can you imagine?
We
Because
were
I wanted to make sure the language was right. My son was like, oh, my God. He said, Mom, either you and Roberta learn how to do this now, or I'm going to tweet for you. And one of us is going to put out developmental psychology. I went, okay, we're going to learn. So Roberta's gotten really good at it.
So we want to thank you for your kind attention. We want to thank the families and kids who participated in our research and the many organizations who have funded us over the years and even now. And colleagues like Dr. Laura Ann Petito, who have been incredibly inspiring to us and others in the field.
I guess, is that it? I think that's what we have.
Thank
you.
Happy to take questions, tomatoes, whatever you got.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. We learned so much. It was a wonderful presentation. So we do have some time left for questions. If anybody has a question for them, please come up to the front if you'd like to sign it, or if you're going to speak it in English, we have interpreters to use sign language up at the front here. Well, hello. It was a wonderful talk today.
Thank you.
It resonated very well with me as well. So you mentioned in your talk today about arts and the Arts and Literacy, the book that was published a while ago, and I was reading through it, and Rincey mentions that there are many ways that a child can be exposed to language, because there's the assumption that children are always hearing things around them in their world, in their daily life. And that's hearing children. They're constantly being exposed to vocabulary. So, but my question is, how many of those vocabulary words are actually impacting the child? And so maybe the reality is that it doesn't matter. And I'm really happy that you mentioned that. And I was reading later on about the joint attention. And joint attention, the discussion about, because for deaf children, language comes through the eyes, and there's a lot of competition with English. Children using their eyes for different stimuli in the world, what they're seeing in terms of language or what else is going on around them. A lot of things are going on. So there's competition going on, language competition, or things competing with language specifically. And then in deaf culture, you look somebody in the eye when you speak to them, and so that's another language thing that's going on. So that with hearing mothers and deaf mothers interacting with their children, are they signing, or do they have the child's attention while they're signing? Are they trying to do a certain action or something with the child? Are they playing? Do they have toys? And then what's the kid looking at? Are they looking at the sign? Are they looking at the toy? And if the mother's trying to teach them sign while they're playing with something, maybe they're clueless about the fact that they are using signs, but the kid isn't really seeing them. They think they're exposing them to signs, but the child's actually looking at the toy. Whereas a deaf mother would be more in tune to that and would know to get the child's attention, to get eye contact before she would start signing. So I've started to think about that and the quality that you mentioned. Once you have the child's attention and you've made that connection with them through eye contact, then you can start the dialogue. Whereas with hearing children, it doesn't really matter. So it's not, I wonder how that number might impact deaf children, because just signing in front of them isn't really exposure. It's not until they make that eye contact and their brain is thinking language that they're actually getting that stimulus. So it's the contingency that you mentioned is also contingent on the connection, the eye contact that a mother is making with a child, and getting the child interested in what they're talking about, and then, okay, you're looking at me, now I can have this conversation with you. So I think that research, or that kind of research, would be great, and there's not much out there, if any. And so you talk about these research where they they expose child to numbers and, expose child to language and lexical items and numbers of that, but there's a lot missing in terms of like deaf children and what we need to communicate. And so I think we need to talk to the public about that and the impact for deaf children that that implies. And exposing them to language could be in sign language or whatnot, but there's just not much research out there. So I'm really glad you mentioned that and that you mentioned videotapes. To me, physically, I need to make a connection with people. I think that's the key. So these are just some ideas I've had, and I don't know if I have an exact question, but I just thought I would share my thoughts with you and see your reaction to them.
I think you have at least 3 dissertations.
Right,
there.
that's right, that's right. So with the hearing kids, it all depends on the kid's age. Because you don't expect to make big eye contact, like you said, when a child is immersed in play. Dunham up at the University of Halifax did a study where they showed that if the parent follows the child's line of regard, looking at the objects that the kid is looking at, then the kid is more likely to learn a new word than if the parent tries to take the child, but these are 18-month-olds, tries to take the child's attention off what the child is interested in and have the child focus on what the parent is interested in. So I think you're right that it works a little differently with hearing children and with deaf children. Do you know about the work by Judy Riley, who shows, and there's a guy in Japan, Masataka, who shows that parents who use sign engage in the equivalent of infant-directed speech. So they exaggerate their signing motions and they avoid negative facial expressions when they interact with their babies, potentially violating meaning because they so want to communicate with their babies.
I mean, having said that, it may well be, and Laura, you would know if this exists, or other folks in this room would know if it exists, it may be that deaf parents are more attuned to being able to follow in with their kids than hearing parents. And that would be fascinating, too. I mean,
well, we have to talk about what kind of deaf parent, too. If it's a native deaf parent,
native
yes.
signer, sorry.
But if it's not a native deaf parent, then I would worry more if the parent didn't know sign about how they were following up with the child.
But of course, that kind of attunement is, it's really tricky in a number of cases. Like we know when moms are depressed, or we know when there's kids who have atypical development, that it throws off that interaction. So, I mean, there are a lot of things that can, whether it's a hearing parent with a deaf child, I don't know the answer to that. But I think, there are a lot of these relationships that haven't been explored to the best of my knowledge.
So
but
it's
I don't,
such a
know,
big
Laura?
question, really.
Is there some stuff there? Right.
Who sign to their babies, and there's the equivalent types of motherese and sign final lengthening and increased pauses and repetition and all of
and
the
a wider sign space.
That's right. And all of the cues that we thought were unique to the auditory modality actually are right there and preserved in the manual modality. So those are seen, and they're seen early. Also, parents change in the same way that a hearing parent changes over time, increasing the complexity of their utterances. Deaf parents do that, signing deaf parents do that too. So the parallels are quite striking. Whether or not a deaf parent or a hearing parent, if one is more in tune than the other, that hasn't been determined. But certainly signing motherese is a very robust phenomenon.
So, for a long time in language acquisition research, we talked about that children have to have input. And what we've meant by input is they have to hear language. And that's coming out of the MIT Chomskyan model. And now we know it ain't just about the input. It's not just about the language that passes children's ears. It's about the interaction. And the interaction has to be of a specific sort to make a dent in helping children learn language. We have to talk about the things that children are interested in, and not the things that we are necessarily interested in.
Just to add the basic point, though, and then come to you, is that, you know, it again speaks to how this partnership, I think, between what we can learn in the basic science, if we dig down and truly understand the mechanisms,
Right.
and do these studies on various populations, can be so informative in how we can think about interventions.
I just want to add that it was interesting to see more of this kind of research for those from hearing parents, as opposed to who are deaf from hearing parents. They would be challenged to see that kind of thing. Sorry to say, I'm not in this program. I'm from a deaf studies program, and we just talked about language from the past to today. And the teacher asked us to come here to participate in this, but I think you gave a wonderful talk, a great presentation.
Thank you. So teachers have to think about this too in interacting with kids. And we know that unfortunately in preschool classrooms and elsewhere, teachers talk the vast majority of the time, and children talk very little. So that means they're not getting the back and forth conversational duets they need to grow language.
Well, but, and there's a really interesting but, even if it's this model of the teacher talking to the kid, when you look at the quality of the language that's out there, David Dickinson has actually observed these interactions, and they're not super rich interactions. In fact, he claims that only 19% of the kind of language and conversations that are used with kids are really language-rich conversations. So when we talk about languageizing the environment, we really mean not just to have more language popped in the background, but creating these opportunities for more of that special kind of interaction that is consistent with the sort of science that
So
we
not just
talk about
asking
today.
rhetorical questions like happens in most classrooms, where there's a yes or no answer or a single word answer required from the child,
Yeah.
but asking questions that are genuine and that really get dialogue going. So as long as we're on David, this is a tip for parents who have hearing or deaf children, it doesn't matter. He came up with this little slogan I love, strive for 5. And what he means by that is 5 back and forth. That's a conversation. Strive for 5.
Thanks so much for a wonderful lecture. I'm going to sign what you will be about
Thanks very much for a wonderful lecture. I'm going to sign about the paradigm shift, if you don't mind speaking for me, interpreter. So, here at Gallaudet, we encourage hearing parents who have deaf children to acquire sign language and encourage that in their children. And our focus has most of the time been on numbers and statistics. How many? Quantity. And parents who have maybe 5 or 6 signs often feel somewhat unfortunate, depressed. And they feel like they can't learn sign language. But the baby has to learn to talk. That's what they feel. So for them, that means a cochlear implant or hearing aids. And that's fine if the parents, it's their choice. And if they know an audiology and speech language pathologist, that the sign is an assistance. And it will assist in language acquisition. And then the language acquisition will occur for the baby. So my aha moment today, well, this afternoon, during your lecture, was that the quality of the hearing parents who might have 5 or 6 signs if they're using them appropriately and they're using turn taking and they're interacting with their baby, then fewer signs means better language acquisition rather than more signs. And in the past, we focused on how many signs the parents are using, or how many signs the parents should learn. And if it's not enough, we have them come here and we teach them more signs. And that seems to be the wrong approach. So thank you for enlightening us.
So great. I just want to add that, first of all, thank you. But, you know, I hope what we don't end up doing is having an either or.
That's right.
You know, it's really that a lot of times the quality comes from being able to have enough signs to continue that conversation in Strive for Five. So the problem we had, I think, is that we got into a quantity metaphor
Just open the
and
kid's head
just
up
said
and pour it
that's
in.
what's important.
Right.
But I think it's, you know, these go hand in hand. They're not really
exclusive.
totally divorced.
So let me give you an example.
Oh, it's-
Let's say you know French,
Yeah.
right? You have 5 French words, right? Lait, chien, chat, you know, etc. If you only knew 5 French words, you really couldn't carry on a good conversation. And if you had a child who you needed to teach French to, it wouldn't be enough, because children need to hear sentences and not just isolated words. Because one of the principles of language learning that we've extracted from the literature is that it's a reciprocal process. Grammar can be used to learn words, and words can help you learn grammar. So in fact, I think you're doing the right thing by encouraging parents to
Well,
come
do
in
both.
to learn more words, but also to try to use their words in interaction as opposed to just saying shat, 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 you know.
But there's a really good example
Yeah.
out there now that's I think worth using as a model. There's been some real issues, I think, with the way we're dealing with the Hispanic population across the United States. And many of the Hispanic parents have been told, don't talk to your kid in Spanish. But that's their home language.
Yes.
And
Yes,
if
it's
they,
true.
it's honest to God true. And if they're not using Spanish with their children, you can see what's going to happen. We're sort of restricting them to the 5 or 6 words that they know in English. And I think the most important thing we can all do, well, for one, we can all understand that children are quite capable of learning more than one language. And this is true whether it's sign language and another language. And Laura's written
Laura's work is very
extensively
important
on
there.
this, but
Yes.
so have many other people. It's a good thing to know more than one language. In fact, it's an awesome thing to know more than one language. So I think we have to encourage that and stop discouraging people to speak in a language where they're super, super limited.
So notice, this is a fabulous opportunity for you guys to get in the dissemination game. There is research that shows that children can learn sign and oral language at the same time. The sign language does not hurt the child's oral language. And there are too many myths out there about how language learning needs to take place. It's too prescribed, and it's not based in the science. So if you guys could figure out how to educate parents along these lines, and pediatricians are key in this chain. Because as Kathy pointed out, and I don't want to slam any particular group, but it's pediatricians I have heard who tell parents, talk English to your child, even though they really don't speak English, but they speak Spanish. The child needs to have good language models, regardless of what the language is.
All right, so good discussion. We want to thank you two so much for giving this wonderful lecture today. And thank you for joining us here at Gallaudet. I want to remind everybody here, once this session is done, we're going to have a small reception that we can all reconvene at, and you're all invited to attend. And it is in the SLCC Sorensen Center atrium, if you want to reconvene there after this is over. So we'll head there now, but again, thank you to the both of you very much for coming today.
Thank you. You were so fun. Thank you.